Space is about wonderment. First time the shuttle went off, America was watching it.
I remember watching the very first space shuttle flight on a very small TV set in a dorm room in college and thinking, gosh, that would be so neat.
When I was a kid, nobody would ever thought that I'd be sending people into space.
Out here, people are dealing with a vehicle that's the size of a 737 and sending it 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. I mean, it's really serious stuff.
The shuttle goes up and comes back. And it's done 133 times, so the public's attitude about it is entirely different than the people involved in the program and what it actually has achieved.
Going to the moon was a huge accomplishment for humanity. And we've done so many missions on the shuttle, people don't realize that we've made this other huge accomplishment in building the International Space Station.
The most dramatic thing, of course, was the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia, because that really focused attention on what the agency's mission should be.
We have had 2 tragic accidents out of 133 launches. So you have to look at the space business as that kind of business.
In 2004, it came out with the decision to retire the shuttle fleet and retire a program that has been in existence now for almost 30 years and move in a new direction.
Holy cow, I'd love to see us go back to the moon and Mars. I'd like to see that in my lifetime anyway.
I'm very concerned about the future. We've wasted an awful lot of time over the last 30 years.
We've sent a lot of astronauts around the Earth for 30 years, and we haven't sent astronauts anywhere else. And I think that we realize that it's time to take those next steps beyond Earth orbit and see what else is out there.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
We had the spirit back in those days, during particularly Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, when we were just starting out. It was a time where you really were excited about the future. This Saturn V, which was a majestic rocket. It really was a beautiful thing. This is a gigantic 365-foot rocket, 7.5 million pounds of thrust, 5 engines in the first stage. Worked every time. We launched that 13 times, 12 times in Apollo and 1 time in Skylab. And it just performed beautifully. And the same way with the Apollo spacecraft. Same dedication I saw in Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo I've seen over the last 14 years working with these people, but I don't see enough to keep that spirit going, regretfully. Because the amount of money that's going to be given to the space program is going to be limited just like everything else. There's no question about it. I wish I could be more excited about it at this particular time. We'll see what happens.
A lot of people will talk about how can the agency get more involved in American culture or somehow get it into their mind. And my response is, I don't think the issue is as much getting NASA into people's minds. I think it's more about getting them more specific information about what we do. I think the knowledge is a mile wide, but only goes about an inch deep. They like NASA, they think NASA's cool, but they don't really know specifically what we're doing these days.
I started working at NASA as a student in the early days of the shuttle program in the 80s. I've been here 25 years, and the changes that I've seen, I think, have to do with the evolution of the space shuttle program, because that's really been the only program I've worked with here at NASA. We're coming up on the 30-year anniversary of the space shuttle program in April of this year. The shuttle configuration hasn't really changed that much. I mean, we've made a lot of improvements technically inside the various systems on board the space shuttle. The way we conduct the launch countdown and the facilities are all the same here at Kennedy.
I grew up and was raised right here in in Brevard County, Cocoa, Florida, and best job in town. I mean, it was the best job in town to get. God, who doesn't want to build a rocket? I mean, really. My process is the VAB, anything that goes on in there, but as we go to it, stacking the boosters, as the boosters come over from the RPSF, or even from Utah, that's my building out back to is the RPSF, which is a rotation processing facility. We process the boosters over there, stand them up straight, ship them over to the VAB, get them ready to stack on the MLP. And after we stack the boosters, both left and right, then we bring the external tank in that comes down from MSU and it comes in right here at the turn basin. Take that off the barge, bring it inside, prep it, stick it up in the prep cell, get it ready to go over for mate. And we do all the closeouts on that. So, and then I turn it over to the orbiter guys. From start to finish, it's 45 days on a good flow.
In the early days of the shuttle program, we were launching a lot of satellites. We had some scientific laboratories that actually stayed inside the payload bay of the space shuttle.
One of the greatest inventions we've had is the Hubble telescope, to actually go out there and show, planets so far away.
We then started with the shuttle Mir program, where we had a partnership with Russia, and we were able to learn about how you live and work in space for long duration periods of time on board a space station. And then we launched the International Space Station with 16 nations, and so that's been a huge success. All these components are built all over the world for the space station, and they end up in our space station processing facility. We check them out, test them, connect them together, make sure they're all working correctly, and then launch them. And the astronauts, they're flying at 17,000 miles per hour around the Earth in these huge spacesuits and actually assemble the space station elements together. And today it's the size of a football field, and we've got space station crews living on board 24/7.
People don't really know much about it, but they do a lot of very important experiments up there in terms of inventing new drugs and possible cures for diseases, stuff like that.
Hey! The awesome smell of space.
It's an amazing turn of events, and I think it's really a wonderful symbol of humans working together from different countries. Because up in space, at least for now, you don't really worry so much about war, I think, when you have astronauts working together internationally.
We have 3 missions left, STS-133, STS-134, and then STS-135. It is taking a number of supplies up to the International Space Station, and there is no other vehicle at the moment that can do what the space shuttle does. So in these last 3 missions, we have to load up the station with supplies, spares, and of course delivering things like Robonaut. It was developed in a really innovative partnership between NASA and GM, General Motors. It just represents a new way of working in space. He can do very intricate tasks. So I think it's to get him up there and to see what he's capable of and what the astronauts are capable of doing with Robonaut, and then looking for opportunities to get out there and do some tests. What can he do outside the vehicle? What kind of equipment can he work with? What kind of tools can he work with? What can he do that the astronauts can't? And that's why they call it exploration. We're going to take him up there and find out.
We're going to be operating the space station. It's on orbit now till 2020. We will continue to have access to the space station through our international launch partners, which would be Russia, Japan, and in French Guiana with the European Space Agency.
This past year, we saw a private company do something that only nations have done over the past 5 decades, and that was to launch a spacecraft into orbit and safely return it into a splashdown in the Pacific. That is unique. So I think the biggest thing is kind of a shift from this monolithic government type program to doing things that excite industry and get people excited about investing in space and seeing that there's a future in space exploration.
Because of budgetary things, we're going to have to rely on the Russians for a while to carry our astronauts up, which certainly goes against my grain, going back to the history of the program and everything else. Even though we are friends now and colleagues and working hard together on the space program along with 15 other nations. But still, we've been the leader in space, and I'm very concerned about the future.
From the processing team of Discovery to the crew of Discovery, enjoy the ride. Thank you very much.
Go for main engine start. We have main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition and the final liftoff of Discovery. A tribute to the dedication, hard work, and pride of America's space shuttle team. The shuttle has cleared the tower.
Discovery now making one last reach for the stars.
A lot of people are sad about the retirement of the space shuttle, and I understand that. It has been an incredible workhorse over the past 3 decades. But, you know, that decision was made in 2004 in the wake of the Columbia accident. And what the agency is doing now is focusing on how to extend humanity's reach beyond Earth orbit. And to do that, you have to retire the shuttle fleet. I don't look at it as much as an ending as I do the next step in our exploration of space.
When the Apollo program was shut down, and we actually had 3 more missions for Apollo. We were going to go 18, 19, and 20. As you recall, the last Apollo mission was Apollo 17. And that was cut off by the economic situation back at the time. The day we sent off Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin was real ironic to me. Just as Neil Armstrong put his foot on the moon, we laid off 1,800 people down here, which is lost in the situation now, but that's what happened to the program. So NASA turned around, the administration turned around and said, okay, where can we go from here? You can't continue Apollo, we're not going to give you the money for it. So it's settled on the shuttle program. As much credit as I can give to the space shuttle and the things that have transpired over the last 30 years, I can say at the same time that we really sentenced ourselves to 30 years of hard labor in LEO. LEO is low Earth orbit, and that's where we've been for the last 30 years. Ironically now, I look at 1970, what did we have? We had an economic crisis, we had a major energy crisis, and we had problems with employment and everything else. Does that sound familiar? Because that's what we have right now. And that's the way it has evolved and how the space program has been affected.
Welcome.
Our first goal is to complete the International Space Station by 2010. We will finish what we have started. In 2010, the Space Shuttle, after nearly 30 years of duty, will be retired from service.
NASA is a very small investment of our taxpayer dollars. When you look at the grand scheme of the federal budget, it's less than 1% of the entire federal budget. I think we're respected around the world in the technical communities for what NASA has achieved and going into space these last 50 years since the first flight of Alan Shepard back in 1961.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The nation needs a challenge. We had the challenge back in 1958 through 1969. It was a race. The Soviets were rattling their rockets against us, and then, of course, they shocked the world when they put the Sputnik up in October of 1957, and just shocked the world and sort of woke us up to a degree, and we started to come back. In those days, when we established the Mercury program and the follow-on programs that led us to the landing on the moon, the nation was behind us 100%. That was the big difference in those days.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
After we landed the astronauts on the moon, we had beaten the Russians. Now, the vagaries of the American public and the Congress are such that once you've done it, a little bit of interest is lost.
It's very pretty out here.
The entire world was watching when Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969. How many people were watching when Apollo 12 landed? And you can remember the coverage of Apollo 13. By that time, they'd considered moon landings routine, and it wasn't until you had the explosion of the service module that people paid attention to that mission. In Apollo 14, if you ask people what they remember about that, it was Alan Shepard's golf shot. You know, not the area of the moon that they were exploring and the rocks and what they learned from that. So we're a nation that likes firsts, and I think part of that is going to be that next first thing.
Touchdown.
For me, it would be that next human step on another celestial body. Now, a lot of people say it's Mars, but for me, I don't care.
You know, a lot of the questions that we look at NASA are some simple questions is, why are we here and how did we get here? Are we alone? These are very simple questions, but they're very hard to try to find answers to.
I think the exploration of Mars helps lend answers to those questions. It is the next planet that is closest to us. It does have a bit of an atmosphere. You know, could life in some other form exist on Mars?
The first time I worked at NASA, working with some of the greatest physicists, and on private time you ask them, it's like, so do you believe in life on other planets? And they go, absolutely. They go, it's arrogant for us to think there's no one else out there. There's so many planets, it's so big.
If you talk to some of the former Apollo astronauts, they'll say it's about the survival of the species, that at some point we're going to have to leave this planet and go out and colonize something else, just as in the 1700s and 1800s people were colonizing North America.
Mars is very important because it is, in a lot of ways, the future. I don't know if we're quite there yet, but we're working towards that. It will be an exciting time to see if this happens in our lifetimes or not. I mean, it takes 6 months to get there and 6 months to come back, and I guess they say sometimes that's a 2-year mission. So there's a lot that's involved in getting people to Mars.
Taking 6 months to go one way to Mars is ridiculous. Hey, you know, maybe they'll do it sometime, but you need much more powerful upper stages, which we don't have. The rockets such as SpaceX, the Falcon 9 rocket, and that type of thing will service the space station. That's all. So let's say we get that super rocket. What are we going to be able to do? Because we are limited by the upper stages. We're going to land astronauts on an asteroid 15 years from now. Wow! We've been relying on the same fuel that we used back on Apollo, and that's liquid hydrogen. And liquid hydrogen has done a great job. But the rocket scientists would tell you that the specific impulse of liquid hydrogen is limited. You need something much more powerful than that to get out.
To be able to create a habitat for humans to live and survive that 6-month trip there and to stay there on the planet and be able to survive that and then come back, you've got to have enough supplies and water and food, and your launch vehicle and your space vehicle has got to be able to get back and forth safely. The terrain of Mars, there's a lot to be understood there. How our equipment would work, how people would survive there, what kinds of habitats we would have once you get to Mars. All that still has to be decided and engineered, designed.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And ignition and liftoff of Ares 1X. Testing concepts for the future of new rocket design.
I think we have the technology to do it now. I really do. It's just, of course, it always boils down to funding. So.
And SEP. We show a SEP and a tumble motor ignition.
I understand that some believe that we should attempt a return to the surface of the moon
1st, as previously planned. But I just have to say, pretty bluntly here, we've been there before. Buzz has been there. There's a lot more of space to explore and a lot more to learn when we do. After decades of neglect, we will increase investment right away. We will invest more than $3 billion to conduct research on an advanced heavy lift rocket, a vehicle to efficiently send into orbit the crew capsules, propulsion systems, and large quantities of supplies needed to reach deep space. And we will finalize a rocket design no later than 2015 and then begin to build it.
To my mind, since I devoted most of my life to it and very, very proud of being a part of it, it sort of breaks my heart. What if 30 years ago we were able to develop a more powerful upper stage for the rockets we have today? There are things like a photon rocket, there are variations of different ionized rockets, nuclear rockets, and that type of thing. It would have been nice if 30 years ago we started working on that. Where I'd like to see us in the position right now where we could say, all right, we're really ready to go out. Mars, to me, is just the first step. That's a baby step. The moon was a baby step. If you want to be a space cadet, you go out. What would probably challenge us is when we really, in the eyes of the world, are now a second-class space nation. Maybe that would do it.
I think largely people are driven by events, and publicity only lasts so long. But there are certain things that are indelible in people's minds. And I think the space shuttle in particular, when people look back at it, it will remain indelible, as the Apollo era did. I mean, it's an era of history we're going through. We don't often see that it's exciting people as much as it is, but in the end, when people look back and they see what has been accomplished, you realize what a great stride we've made as humans.
And to the ship that has led the way time and time again, we say farewell, Discovery.
The space shuttle, it should be commemorated, it should be marked, but at the same time, you know, we should be looking ahead at what we're doing.
122 million miles flown during 25 challenging space flights. Your landing ends a vibrant legacy for this amazing vehicle that will long be remembered. Welcome home, Endeavour.
It's getting harder right now. We're losing a lot of good talented people around here, and a lot of good friends.
Having fired the imagination of a generation, a ship like no other, its place in history secured, the space shuttle pulls into port for the last time, its voyage at an end.
A little more than 40 years ago, astronauts descended the 9-rung ladder of the lunar module called Eagle. It wasn't just the greatest achievement in NASA's history, it was one of the greatest achievements in human history.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Boy. And the question for us now is whether that was the beginning of something or the end of something. I choose to believe it was only the beginning.
I think science fiction is very entertaining for people because it can make you think about things in a way you haven't thought about them. It sort of stretches your imagination about the impossible.
But if you talk to the people who were involved in NASA, chances are they were inspired by something as a child. You know, for me, it would have been television shows like Lost in Space and Star Trek.
For other people, younger people, it might be something like the Transformers. So we have to remember that this is fun stuff. We have to get people excited about it, and that's what movies like that do. It kind of touches that inner child in us that gets us excited and reminds us of why we were interested in space exploration to begin with.
So many people believe that there's got to be something else out there. And that's why alien movies are so popular. In my lifetime, I would love to have contact with an alien race. I'm sure a lot of people would.